Hello and welcome to your go-to Detroit Pistons podcast, the Pistons Pulse, co-hosted by me, Bryce Simon of Motor City Hoops, a former D1 hooper and current teacher, husband, and father of 3 amazing kids.
And I'm Omari Sankofa, the second Pistons beat writer for the Detroit Free Press.
And of course, we're always blessed to be joined by our producer, Wes Davenport. And if you are not listening to him and Blake Silverman over on the DBB YouTube channel with the pin down, you guys need to be. That's Wednesday, Thursday nights live. You can call in, asking questions, obviously asking questions live over on the DBB website, wherever you want to do that. Good morning. Happy Monday. Yeah, like changing up a little bit. To be honest, guys, this has a lot to do with my schedule right now. I'm back teaching. I know the purple clashes with the blue and red of the Piston stuff, but we are a purple school here. School starts here in about an hour for me, so we have to get this in. I'm coaching football, so after school's busy. Sundays are reserved for Lions football, off-season so we just got to kind of make it work right now, but surely people won't mind starting their weeks off with us, right?
Especially after we took last week off. Like,
yeah.
I know we've pat ourselves on the back for this, so I won't do it too much. But we did go 140. It was
139 or something.
139, like without taking a single break. And I'm still I'm on today, but I'm still off season until next week. But it does feel good to be back. Like, it's weird taking a week off in like 2.5 years. I had a week off last year actually too, but still, I'm so used to doing this on Monday that it just feels good to be back. It's like my first day of school too, you know?
Yeah, I mean, somebody DM'd me and was like, hey, no Pistons Pulse in 17 days. What's going on? And one, it felt good, right? That somebody likes us enough that they don't want us to go that long without an episode. So 139 Iron Man. Yeah, I don't mean to going back to Motor City Hoops. I think we were right at 100 episodes or something like that. So yeah, man, it's been a journey for sure. Real quick shout out for me. My grandma turned 95 this weekend, Omari, and we had her birthday on Saturday.
Big shout out.
Yeah.
To grandma. That's amazing.
Grandma Bert. Yeah. And then what was cool, I'm at the birthday party with the family and all that. And one of my aunts so my grandma had 10 kids. So the second oldest kid, my Aunt Barb comes up. She's like, hey, I really enjoy listening to you on the pod. And what's cool is like, I would say there's like a 1% chance she's a Pistons fan. I don't even know how much she enjoys the NBA. Like, she's just tuning in to listen to her nephew on a podcast. So shout out Aunt Barb. And I have other family members who will share it on Facebook and tune in. And I know they're not Pistons fans at all. It's not like I'm doing a KU podcast or a Chiefs podcast. So shout out the family and the woman it all started with Grandma Bert, 95. So big shout out.
95. Big shout out. And big shout out to the Simon family's pod support as well. Like, I know my parents are always lurking in here, but to see some Bryce family support too. We should just do like a family pod one day. Like, we just have our family take over and they can talk about whatever. We just
the funny thing, the family never asked to get on the pod, but my students asked to come on the pod all the time. And I'm like, really? Okay, give me your thoughts on the Pistons. And they're like, Cade Cunningham, right? And I'm like, yeah, exactly. Like, you can bring me some real content and I'll put you on the pod. Another real quick story. So one of my students the other day goes, hey, I listened to your pod. I was like, oh yeah, what'd you think? And she goes, I had it on for 2 minutes in the living room, and my mom said, what is that crap? Turn it off. It's giving me a migraine.
But who was talking, me or you?
It was both of us, but I think the fact that it was NBA Pistons content, they were like, no, we're good. Like, we don't need to be listening to this in the house. So
I guess we can mark them down for not being excited for the season. I know we're going to talk about the vibes today.
What are the vibes around it?
They're in the they're in the bad vibes category.
Yes,
I don't know what the vibes are. I feel like this time last year was just pure excitement, just with Monty Williams and Cade coming back, and it just seemed like everything was going right. And like a year later, like, I don't know if it's excitement. I feel like it's like, I don't want to say fear. Like, that's too strong a word.
Reservations, hesitations.
Like, there's maybe some hesitation. There's like, okay, like on paper, it seems like these ingredients could create a pretty good cake, but like last year, the cake like fell and burned at the same time. So how do we not do that?
And set the house on fire.
And set the house on fire.
We had to move blocks because it was not livable anymore.
No insurance payout. Like, just awful. It was all bad. And now it's like, okay, this seems like it could be good, but we have to wait and see. Because again, you have a new head coach, you have a new front office for the first time in 4 years. Like, these are all things that generally create excitement, but it came after a disaster season. So I think as a fan, it's just like, let's wait and see. Like, let's see how the first week goes. Let's see how preseason looks. It's like wait and see. Like that's how I would characterize it. I don't know if you feel differently, Bryce, but I feel like people are just in a mode of just we have the Lions right now, so we're going to enjoy the Lions, and then when the Pistons come, we're going to wait and see if they're going to bring joy to our lives or if it's going to be like last year where we were sad every other day.
Well, there's a lot of young guys, but I think with like JI and JD, especially, that's worn off. With Sasser, it seems like it's already worn off of them being just young and exciting. With the SAR, and we do have a question about a SAR. So Derek, we'll answer the questions at the end of the pod. We'll kind of do a Q&A at the end. So if you guys are watching live, Facebook, Twitter, wherever, get those in, YouTube, get those questions in, and we'll do it at the end. But yeah, it seems like some of that is worn off with the young guys. Like for Cade, it's be good or we're going to be frustrated. With JI and JD, it's like, can you please be good and show us stuff for an all-around game? Asar, I think there's still a little bit of excitement, but there's a little hesitation. I think even with Ron, right, there's some hesitation of what can he be. So just Football Academy, Australia High champions, Rocky from Down Under. Let's go Lions. Thanks, Rocky. I know you've been supporting for a long time. And yeah, Omari, Lions with a big, exciting win last night on Sunday Night Football. 2 years in a row, the Lions get prime time and come away with a big victory. So shout out the Detroit Lions.
I'm still not used to this. Like I still like speaking of fanfare, I still have like a little bit.
Your head coach is on national. Is it Applebee's commercial?
Yeah, I think it's Applebee's. Yeah. Yeah, I don't know what to make. Like, I know what to make of it. Like, it's all objectively good, but it's just like, okay, at some point, like this, whatever this is, whatever this good feeling is, it's just gonna start to die down a little bit, right?
So I've wondered about that a little bit with the Lions because, yeah, there's excitement the first year you're good and it's all good, right? Because there's no expectations. Well, now it's like there are people Super Bowl champions now. Like it's not after week one going into Arrowhead and beating the Chiefs last year. Before the season started, I heard a lot of Lions Chiefs Super Bowl predictions and Lions Ravens or whoever. It's not quite as fun throughout the entire journey whenever the expectations are there from the start. Doesn't mean it can't be fun, but if you go on a 2-game, 3-game losing streak or your quarterback throws some interceptions or whatever, all of a sudden things aren't as fun. But let's get back to the Pistons.
Yeah.
It is weird, right? Because it's like, it's a young team. It's a team that I think is more talented. We've talked a lot about this, but it doesn't seem like there's a ton of excitement. I just think everybody's worried that it is just not going to fit the way it should, that it's not going to be better after what we've seen the last couple of years.
No doubt. But I also look at just the fact that these last 4 years, you always had some type of like really high draft excitement, whether like year one, I mean, like that was the COVID year, but they had 3 rookies, and then you have Cade the following year. Like it's not anything specific to Ron Holland. I think it's just more so the nature of this draft where, you don't necessarily have a prospect like at the very, very top that's going to generate that type of, Cade or Jaden Ivey or whoever excitement. And I think Asar has some of that just because of how he played in Summer League. And not only that, but like he has a twin brother, like his game. I think Asar was probably a more unique prospect than that, even though he was from overtime elite.
Sure.
He had qualities that still that people could buy into, right? Especially when you're in the Wemby draft.
He's a top 1% athlete too, Amar. Like Ron Holland's a good athlete, but not what Asar is.
Right. And I also just think that people paid attention to that draft more because of Wemby, right? So yeah, more people who were familiar with Asar just because they were aware that could be an outcome. Whereas with Ron Holland, I don't know if anybody really had any big expectations for the 5th pick, but then they went a little bit left field with that as well. And he was in the G League, obviously. So, a lot of people didn't watch him. So I think that's part of it too. It's just a weird offseason where you had all this stuff happen. But what does it mean? Like, how is it going to come together? Like, is this going to be an actual good team that we can root for every night? Or are they going to be like the 1.5 version of last year?
I mean, and maybe that's good, right? Like we had all of these expectations and all this excitement about a team that didn't end up fitting together and didn't make sense and didn't have floor spacing. Theoretically, I mean, I think we always try to put a positive spin on things, right? I think that's why, most of our listeners tune into us because we're not here just crazy takes and negative and bashing the team.
It's just like honesty, like if there's reason to be excited, we call it.
But we see no reason to just go overly negative. I don't want to sit down, here and just be negative that way. That's not how I want to start my Monday morning. But don't you feel a little bit like the team does make sense? Like there is I have real worries defensively, Omari. I really do. I think they're going to struggle on that end, depending on how much you can play Asar with different lineups. I don't even Ron. I don't know. There's going to be a great defender as a rookie, depending on how much he can play. But I think offensively, we could see a fun team to watch because I do think there's real floor spacing. And I just don't know that they've had that. And maybe I'm overvaluing that, but I think that's going to make a real difference. You're talking about off the ball floor spacers, two of them on real volume in Hardaway Jr. and Malik Beasley. I have pretty high expectations for what the offense is going to be. I'm not talking about top 10 or whatever, but just a lot better than what we've seen over the last few years.
I think if nothing else, it should be more organized, right? Like last season, there was just these stretches where they would have 5 turnovers in a span of 2.5 minutes, or they would shoot 2 for 17 from three in the first half, or it would just be these extended stretches where nothing would click. And you mentioned the shooting. You have Tobias, you have Malik Beasley, you have Tim Hardaway Jr., you have these guys who have been knocking down threes their entire careers, and you're like 99% sure coming into next season they're going to play off of Cade and Ivy pretty well, and ideally avoid those long stretches. Like I think they even mentioned, like earlier in the summer that, Trajan Langdon, front office, that when you can shoot the ball, it cuts down on turnovers because you have more space to maneuver. And I think those things absolutely went hand in hand last season. I mean, Cade's dribbling right into traffic. Obviously, they're committing 2 defenders to him, if not 3 every single time, because nobody else could shoot. So at the very least, you probably avoid that. And even like I think Tobias Harris, like Tim Hardaway Jr., these guys don't generate excitement, but they're stabilizers, right? And when you get like 20, 25 games into the season, eventually you realize that does make a difference. Just having veterans who can knock down timely shots, not commit too many mistakes. And then you couple that with Cade, like he's in year 4 now. Ivy's in year 3, Duran's in year 3. These guys are still young, but they're not quite young guys anymore. Like Ivy, Duran. Next summer they're going to be, at the beginning of like their extension negotiations, right? So to me, a lot of that just comes down to how much this team can really grow up. Like we talked about earlier, I talked about young team excitement with the draft and all that, but really, I think fans want to see this team start to grow up and really put those stretches they had like last season in the past. Like they can't look like a young team this season. I think they have to be somewhere in the middle, maybe a little bit closer to what the Pacers were 2 years ago.
So what are the expectations? Like, what are we looking for? I know you get to go and watch camp a little bit, but what are the vibes that we're hoping to hear coming out of camp? What is, in the preseason, the first 10 games of the season, what are we wanting to see, Omari, from this team or individual players, rotations? Anything like that? What are you hoping to see from the team, or what would get these positive vibes going outside of like, yeah, if they start out 7-3, obviously the vibes are going to be good, but what kind of gets some of the excitement going and makes the fans feel a little more optimistic about the trajectory of this organization?
I think one of the young guys has to begin to take that next step. And what that next step looks like, I think it's tough to say, but between JI and JD, at least one of those guys you want to see become a really solid starter, right? Like not even necessarily like that star leap, but they're consistently positive on at least one end of the floor. For Duran, we know what he could do offensively. He's a lob threat, some secondary playmaking. For him, it's probably more so that defensive leap. But for JI, I think you do want to see him become, more of like that primary, secondary initiator type that they drafted him to be. And if Cade comes in and kills it, like let's say Cade is averaging 24-7 and for his first 15, 20 games, like it'll create some hype, but at the same time, it's Cade, right? Like you want to see him do that. And to some extent, there's an expectation. But if another young guy comes in and starts playing really, really well, I think now fans are like, okay, now we have 2 guys that we're really building around, and we have these other up and coming prospects who are developing. So what can this become? To me, it just comes down to who that number 2 is. If it's JI, if it's JD, it might be a SAR. Like it could be anybody, right? But if another young guy takes that step, then I think the excitement begins to go up substantially, because now at that point, it's like, okay, we have 2 guys who can lead us to that next step. And just looking around the NBA, you need at least 2, if not 3. I think that's what hurt them last year. It's just everybody can defend Cade, and now you just shut down their entire offense, right? So if you're a fan and JI is coming out, putting up 16, 17 pretty efficiently, I think that changes things pretty substantially.
I think that's where I'm at as well. For me with Cade, it's what does he do for the whole year? Does he stay
Yeah.
healthy, play 70 plus games? And does he put up the numbers that we kind of projected? But that's more of a whole year thing. We've seen Cade get off the slow starts at times coming back from injury to start seasons. So I'm not worried about like the first 10 games. I'm not saying what JI and JD do in the first 10 games necessarily is the end all be all. But I think those are the two guys that I think this season is the most important for. What, because you mentioned they're extension eligible next offseason, and you got to start to make those decisions on contracts and put yourself in the right situation. And so I'm interested to see what are the vibes coming out of camp. Are they both in the starting lineup? Is one of them coming off the bench? What is their role? What is their usage? Is JI getting the second option type of usage, or is that still Tobias Harris because JI is not ready? Is Duren anchoring the defense, or is the defense taking a step forward? Because as Rocky says, maybe everybody else just is playing harder and with more effort, and JB's a good defensive coach, but Duren's not necessarily being disruptive and anchoring things. So I think they're the two guys. Ron's going to take some time. Asar, I'm a little bit more like, let's slow it down and just see. I think he's going to be awesome defensively. I think the offense will take some time, but I think JI and JD are a little more pressing. So let's go to a short break. This is going to be a little shorter episode, guys. Like I said, I got school here in 45 minutes or so, but we're going to make the segments just a touch quicker here in the off season. And then once we get back into the meat and potatoes of everything, we'll go back to an hour. So we're going to go to a short break. When we come back, Omari, Wes put some situations in the outline and some scenarios that we saw a lot the last few years. And we're going to talk through maybe how the team could handle them. We'll get to those right after this.
All right, we are back with segment 2, and as Bryce mentioned, we do have some scenarios here that Wes whipped up for us, whether it's coaching or rotation, just to help the team solve those dry spots they had last year. Obviously, I talked about the turnover streaks. I think that's probably a peak one. This is going to be a good Coach Bryce segment. I'm going to shoot some of these at you. So Bryce, let's just start off. Like, let's say they get up to a slow start. They start off 2 for 17 from the floor. You're facing a 15-point deficit at the end of the first quarter. What do you do from that point? I guess what are your starters probably, opening the season, but how do you pivot from there to get some more stability, whether that's leaning on more vets or sort of how would you solve a scenario like that?
Yeah, this is kind of going to be a teaser into our all lineups episode, right?
Yeah.
Where we're continuing to push back because last year we had a lot of fun with that episode, and then they traded for Bojan Bogdanovic, and it completely screwed everything up. That episode is going to be a lot of fun this year. Whenever we do dive into it, it's just going to, like I say, we don't want a move to happen. There's an open roster spot now. They may take that into the year, but we're trying to hold off for a little while.
It really sucks to do an entire hour episode and then it becomes obsolete like within a week. Like we like our episodes to have like a little bit of like a tailwind,
and that one should have had staying power. Like you could have listened to that one middle of the year and been like, oh, they thought this was our, all floor spacing lineup. Man, they were wrong because these two guys can't shoot. But when you do an all floor spacing lineup and it doesn't have Bojan in it because he wasn't on the team, that doesn't work whenever somebody wants to listen 20 games in. So
yeah, we do a whole breakdown and then they trade for LeBron James. And it's just like, it's bad. Whole episode down the drain. Trash.
Because you're putting that guy into about every lineup. So this is something we saw many times, right? Just a blowout in the first quarter. Starters really struggle and they're down right away. Like what path do you take? I think there's two options here. You ask who I would start. My starting lineup has continuously been Cade, J.I., Fontecchio, Tobias Harris, and Jalen Duren. And I know people are going to be frustrated that I don't have Asar in. I get it. I'll listen to the argument. I don't necessarily love Asar and Duren being on the floor together. I definitely don't like the idea of J.I., Asar, and Duren on the floor together. So if you want to move Asar into the starting lineup, that's fine. But to me, it's not for Fontecchio. That means you're either taking Duren out or J.I. out. As I mentioned a little bit ago, I think J.I., JD, those are the most pressing needs. You need to figure out what those guys are. If they get off to a bad start, I think this year I would go the all-vet lineup. I would go to Beasley, Hardaway Jr., Harris, probably Stu, and then you're probably still rocking with Cade at the point guard. Some people have brought this up. The one thing this team doesn't have is a vet point guard still. I mean, you have Cade. If Cade's struggling, J.I. is probably not the answer in this scenario, Omari. Marcus Sasser, probably not the answer in this specific scenario. You don't have, Monty. I still thought Monty Morris was the right idea last year when he was acquired. It just didn't come to fruition. So that's where I don't think you have that vet point guard to come in and just be a calming presence. So it probably still has to be Cade in some capacity, but I would probably go all vet. The other option, Omari, you're down 20 at the end of the first quarter. Is that an option if you don't want to, like, you know what, we're not going to make the comeback tonight? Do you just go all youth? Is that where you go Sasser, Ron, Bobby, Jalen Duren, and Asar, and just see what you have? Like that
So you're
would
just
be
trying
the
to
other
like
option.
run and jump and just like
Yeah, just
overpower teams athletically. Yeah.
sure. Like you're down 20. Let's see. Like, let's use this as a trial run of what could happen here. If you put, I mean, if you had Sasser, Ivy, Holland, Asar, and Duren, like that's pretty athletic, pretty fast. Like we're just going to run and we're going to try to cause havoc on defense and see what happens. Like to me, that would be an opportunity to try that out. And maybe it goes from down 20 to down 35, or maybe it goes from down 20 to down 3 because you just kind of blitz the opponent and change the game.
That could probably work in stretches, right? And I think it depends on the team you're going against as
Yeah,
well.
sure.
I think my question is, to what extent can you balance like that young, bouncy athleticism and speed while also still having shooting? Because if you're ranking the top shooters on this team, what you have, obviously the guys you mentioned earlier that they brought in this offseason, and you also have Fontecchio. None of those guys are really, necessarily plus bouncy athletes, right? So if you're going, say, you
Sure.
keep, you keep Cade out there, or maybe you have Ji running it, you have Sasser, you have some combination of Ron, Asar, Duren. Like that's a lot of rebounding, a lot of running and jumping, not as much shooting. Like, but you could probably bridge the gap somewhere, right? Like, I really like Fontecchio in that starting lineup, but I think you could keep Tech with a lot of different units just as a stabilizer because he does everything pretty well. Like, I think he's a guy that, okay, like maybe you have Ron Holland and, Asar next to him, but if you have Cade and, Stu, now you do have shooters at the 1 and 5, and, you have Tech at the 3. Maybe you could bridge the gap between those two and still have some of that young athleticism and still have some shooting as well.
Yeah, I mean, that's what it's really funny because the two lineups I gave are completely different pathways, right? If you go the vet lineup, the athleticism difference between a Cade, Hardaway Jr., Fontecchio, Harris, Stu lineup compared to a Sasser, Ivy, Asar, Ron, Duren lineup is vastly different. There's a lot of different, but so is the floor spacing. I guess I just wonder if there is a lineup you can throw out there that just changes the energy of the game, the flow of the game, the pace of the game. You throw these guys in there and you just say, go be disruptive defensively and then get out and run. Because the lineup I threw out there isn't scoring in the half court. Like there's not a whole lot of scoring going on in the half court. But if you just get out and run, it could be interesting. And this isn't a lineup I would play every game. I'm just saying in this specific scenario that Wes threw out where, hey, you just got blitzed in the first quarter and you're down 20 going into the second quarter. Let's change things up here. Let's throw something at the wall and see if it sticks in a situation like this. I wouldn't mind seeing that just like up-tempo lineup just to change the pace of the game.
No doubt, because that's the other thing too. If the starters are struggling, that means you already had Tobias and Tech out there. So,
yeah.
So do you just rely on, like to what extent can Malik Beasley and Tim Hardaway shake things up on their own at that point, right? Like at the end of the day, they're playing off of Cade. So as I think about it from that perspective, yeah, in that case, maybe you do just send the kids out there and say, hey, just play up tempo, attack and transition, like make sure you defend, create turnovers, and you may be able to catch teams off guard that way. Because I think my starting lineup, just to put it out there, is probably the same as yours at that point too, just because I like Fontecchio so much as a player. Like, I don't want him to come off the bench. Like, I just feel like I want him in the starting lineup. Like, you have two really solid forwards who can mix positions a little bit with him and Tobias. Like, that's just a luxury. I feel like this team has not really had. Like, they've always only had one pretty good wing. They haven't had two. Whether it's Jeremy Grant or Boyan. I feel like that's something that JB this season can really lean on in those scenarios. And with that, with Tech and Tobias starting, do you envision that they'll even have those types of cold starts that they had last season? It seems like there should be a lot more even coming out of the gate with that.
I mean, that would be the hope, right? Is with Cade in year 4, with Tech and Tobias Harris, you at least hold the fort down a little bit, and we don't see the crazy slow starts we've seen over the last couple of years. Obviously, it's going to happen from time to, the second of a back-to-back or
Mhm.
some crazy road night or something like that. But you would like to think that they're going to get off to better starts. I also agree with Fontecchio. I think Fontecchio and Stu are the two guys I'm really like role player guys I'm interested to watch because I think they're both going to be in the roles that they're best suited for. This is why I push back on Stu starting is Stu coming off the bench to me is finally in the role that he can be successful in and that I think the fan base will appreciate him. The fan base gets frustrated because Stu's not a starting 4-man and I'm not even sure he's a starting 5-man, but as the backup 5-4, I think he can be pretty good. And so I want him to stay there. And then we saw Fontecchio, in that lineup, he's the 4th option offensively, maybe 5th, depending on what you think about Duran. So that's exactly what he should be. And we saw how successful he was in that role. You put Fontecchio in the bench unit. Now maybe you're asking him to be the 2nd option. I'm just not sure he's as effective. So that's why I like keeping Tech in the starting lineup and Stu in the bench unit. I want to go to this next scenario because I think it is interesting. What if Cade Cunningham is having an off night, Omari? Where do the Pistons go if he's just struggling with turnovers, not making shots? Where does the offense come from on that night?
So I would go. I think Ji automatically you put into that one role, and you just trust that his speed and everything he can do, he could thrive in that role. But I would surround Ji with as much shooting as possible, right? Like I would have him next to Malik Beasley, Tim Hardaway. You could have one of Stu or Fontecchio. I'm sorry, you could have one of Tobias or Fontecchio at the 4. And then going back to Stu, I'm playing Stu at the 5. And
Yeah.
like you have shooters like 2 through 5. And Ji is gonna have nights where he's hot, he's gonna have nights where it's not falling. But just spread the court out as much as possible. Let him get downhill. Like that's pretty straightforward. But they also haven't really I feel like we haven't seen a lot of 5-out Ji lineups over the last few years just because they haven't had the roster to do it. And now they can actually do that. And to me, if you put Ji out there with 5, with 4 other shooters, then you're maximizing Ji's upside as far as just his speed getting downhill. And he's such an X factor this season. Like I'm curious to see what version of him we see, like whether he improves shooting or defensively or can really handle those additional playmaking minutes when Cade is out. But yeah, like I love Stu at the 5, just as a floor spacer. I think he's such a different look compared to JD. And if you have JI in at the 1, then I just say just let him cook. You hopefully you hold up defensively enough and you're not punished by your lack of size. So some of that's going to be, matchup based as well. But I would go 5 out with JI and just let him cook and see what happens.
And I think if you aren't there with JI yet, there are some veteran options for this as well. Tobias isn't a primary guy, but Tobias has had games where he takes over 20 attempts and scores 30 points. I know, the playoffs is what everybody remembers with Tobias right now, but he can do that here and there for you if Cade is having an off night. I think the other sneaky answer here is you play through Tim Hardaway Jr. Tim Hardaway Jr. isn't scared to get a bunch of shots up if he's asked to do so. So he had games last year. He was pretty good early. Tim Hardaway Jr. was on my 6-man of the year radar early last season, and then it fell off. But 21, 24, 21, 31, 20, 32, 25, 21, 23, 32. That's in the first 29 games of the season. He had another 32, another 24. He had a 3-game stretch, Omari, 32, 24, 41 points in the middle of January. So this is a guy that, again, this isn't what you want night in and night out because you want to grow the young guys. But if Cade is having a bad night, there are some options there, even beyond just Ji doing it in, I think, a Tim Hardaway Jr., in a Tobias Harris. I don't think Malik Beasley's that guy. That's not his game. Fontecchio, that's not his game. I think Hardaway Jr., maybe even more than Harris, is a guy that's like, oh, Cade's out tonight. Ji needs a little bit of help. I'll take 22 shots. I won't mind doing that. And so I do think that is a good option to have if you're trying to stay competent and competitive and play some version of winning type basketball. It is good to have a vet like that just as an option to go to when necessary.
No, that's definitely a great point. Bryce, okay, they're up 4 2 minutes left in the game. Who are you rolling out there?
So this is interesting. A lot of these other ones, and we're not going to get to all of them. And again, we'll get to the lineup episode, and these we may have to bring back a couple of these because there's one where there's only 10 seconds left. I think that one will be really fun to talk about, but we may want to save that one for the lineup, and then we'll get to your questions after this. Up for 2 minutes left. So do I want to go all defense? Do I want to go vets? Who can I have on the floor in this situation? So Cade's got to be on the floor, right? Like Cade's almost the guy that you're going to have on the floor no matter what.
Right. So you're going to have Cade and then probably one of Stu or Duran at the 5, right? Duran shot 79% from 3 last year. I'm just throwing it out.
From the free throw line.
From the free throw line, not from 3.
I wish he shot 79% from 3. We would not have this team wouldn't have very many issues if Duran
No, they wouldn't.
Yeah, and Duran is an elite rebounder. I probably, you know what? I would leave Duran on the floor because this, as I mentioned earlier, I want to see, this is a scenario I'd want to see what he could do defensively. Now, because of that, I kind of want J.I. on the floor also, but I was going to say you need a SAR in this scenario because you need a SAR to go guard the other team's best player. And so I think this is a situation where getting a SAR on the floor. But if you have Duran and Ivy also, then your floor spacing offensively is a real issue. You're going to and we know these are going to be half-court possessions because it's late in the game. So I don't know if I'm having to set J.I. here. I don't love that.
Yeah, it's tough because you do give something up having Duran out there just from a shooting standpoint. Like you can't have, like, I agree with you what you said earlier. I don't know if I want Duran and a SAR sharing the floor too much, just because I still see Asar as more of a 3-4 hybrid than somebody that you want in the backcourt with Cade. So I think you could probably feel pretty good closing the game with Isaiah Stewart. Like, again, it's matchup dependent, but he's solid interior defender. Like, I think he'll continue to improve shooting, and what he was having around 37% last year on pretty decent volume. So he's on an upward trajectory there. If Duran's having a great game, I stick with him. But like, I really like closing with Stu just because of the shooter.
So maybe I just go Cade, Ivy, Asar, Harris, and Stu.
Maybe. And I could go the same way.
I like having Asar in this scenario. If I'm trying to get stops, like that's the guy I trust the most to go guard the other team's dude, whether it's Kevin Durant or, I mean, I would put him on Jalen Brunson if they were playing the Knicks. I would put him on Jason Tatum or Jalen Brown. Like, that's the guy I'm putting on all of these guys in this scenario. And so I think in some way at the end of a game, you probably have to get Asar on the floor. And then based on floor spacing, that puts one of J.I. or J.D. on the bench. If I was going to keep J.D. in and not have J.I. out there, I would probably go Malik Beasley. Because while I don't think he's like a plus defensively, I probably trust him a little more than Tim Hardaway Jr. And he does have that real off the ball floor spacing the way he shot it last year. So I could see him being in this scenario.
For sure. Do we see Hack and Asar at any point next season, right?
Who?
Like, is that Hack Thompson, Hack and Asar, Hack Thompson, whatever they would call it?
Oh, I got you. I thought there was a nickname I wasn't aware of.
Oh, yes. Nah, I don't think that's a nickname. But does that free throw shooting become a liability late in games?
Yeah, that's a good point. It's possible with 60% from the free throw line last year. Yeah, I mean, he would probably need to get up around 70 and hit some, show it late in games when teams tried it. Yeah, that's a possibility. That's another one. What's J.I. been from the free throw line in his career?
He's probably around 75.
So he's good enough that teams probably aren't going to try it. Yeah, right at 75 for his career. Yeah. So he probably just passes the bar. It's interesting. This is where it's hard because you want to get your young guys this experience, but the young guys just don't fit well enough together to have them all on the floor in these scenarios. That's what makes this tough whenever you get into these. So I want Asar on the floor in this situation because I want to see what he can do defensively. I want to see if he can lock down these guys or at least make life really tough. And then, like I said, you just got to choose between one of J.I. and J.D.
No doubt. I think I'm in the same scenario. And Asar is also such a good rebounder, and he could.
That's another good point. Really, and he could go get you like an offensive rebound that kind of steals the game or something. That's a great point.
Yeah, the upside probably outweighs the downside unless they're just really sitting them to the line every time, and it's just like All right, you got me. But I feel like we haven't even seen that strategy in the modern NBA like as much. So maybe teams are just smarter about not playing those guys late. We have one more we can debate really briefly, and then we'll get to a couple questions at the end. They're competitive through midway through the third quarter, and then the wheels fall off, and you're down double digits with 8 minutes left. So you got to get some points up. You got to defend. You got to do everything. Do you just go back to starters, or is there a different lineup you look at? Like, let's say they're down 12 with 8 minutes left. Who do you go with in that scenario?
Down 12. I mean, I don't think that's enough to like just go crazy where I have to
Yeah.
put a lineup that's just flying up and down the floor. So I think I just go back to what my best lineup is. I think this is another one where maybe you just say the vets. If you blew this lead, it probably depends a little bit what caused it. I would assume it's because JI's having a rough night or JD's turning the ball over. You know, Asar and JD both turned the ball over a little bit last year. So this may be the vet situation where you just go with the Cade, Tim Hardaway Jr., Fontecchio, Harris, Stu lineup and just hope that they can stabilize things and make a comeback there. Again, 8 minutes is an eternity in the NBA. If this was 3 minutes and they were down 12, I would have a different lineup. And again, maybe that's one we can talk about whenever we get to the all lineup episode. But with 8 minutes left, I think I'm just going with the guys I trust the most. And that's probably the vets, because if we blew a lead, it's probably because the young guys were struggling.
And that's what's nice is that they have a true veteran lineup this time around. And we've talked about this in the past, and we'll talk about it more. But I think just JB being able to make his young guys earn every single minute will be good for this team as well. You won't be down 12 and you still have to rely on, a couple second year guys trying to make something happen. Like, I think that internal roster competitive aspect will be pretty good for this team as well. But I probably go the same way. I think you have Cade, I think I probably have Duran. Would you look at going Duran and Stu at the 4 and 5 in that scenario, or are you just completely off the two big lineup?
I'm not off of it. I just want to, I think it would be more based on the opponent than anything. I don't think there's a scenario where I go Duran and Stu because of the game situation, unless like I'm trying to get a free throw check out and all I'm worried about is getting a rebound or something. I think it's just the opponent, right? If I'm playing the Minnesota Timberwolves, I could see a lot of Duran Stu lineups in that game, and I would be okay with that. But I think that's where it comes with those two. So I'm not completely out on Stu at the 4. I just think it's hey, there's an opposing lineup where we could use a little more size at the 4, and this makes more sense. It's not forcing him into the. We saw. Listen, I'm in the camp of I'm glad they tried it, but I'm always in that camp. I saw someone bashing the Jeremy Sohan point guard experiment for the Spurs last year, and I'm like, I don't care that they tried it. They weren't going to win a bunch of games anyway. They didn't want to win a bunch of games. Try it for 40 games. Yeah. And then you can show him, like, if he says, hey, let me play point guard, you're like, no, here's 40 games of you not being good at point guard. I'm okay with these teams trying these things. Once you see that it's not real, then I'm not okay with them continuing to try it. So that's where I'm at with Stu at the 4.
No doubt. Yeah, down 12, I'm probably going Cade, Tim Hardaway Jr., Malik Beasley, Tobias, Stu. But I left Fontecchio out, so maybe I swap Malik Beasley with Fontecchio.
It's a weird one. Like, you have 6, like between the Hardaway Jr., Beasley, Fontecchio situation is going to be interesting to monitor this year. We got to go to short break, guys. We got about 10 minutes. When we come back, we'll answer some of your questions. And then I have a question that's non-basketball related for Omari that I'm really interested to get his answer to. So we'll get to those right after this.
All right, we are back with our third and final segment. If you have an extra question, sneak it in real quick, but we have a handful here that we're going to tackle, and then we'll see how much time we have left. We're going to start off with this question from Derek Brown. If Asar could be a better ball handler, can you see him as the starting shooting guard of the future? So this isn't even dealing with the three-point shooting, but just his ball handling. Let's say, like, for the sake of the question, let's say becomes like firmly above average, right? Like, he can actually create his own shot getting downhill and whatnot, because he probably have to be at that level to really start at that position. Do you see that as a possibility?
Yeah, I mean, I still see Asar more as like a 3-4 type of player, but the more, this has happened in general. Everybody talks about it. It's not a new idea of like I don't think it's positionless basketball, but I kind of am the 1-3-1 philosophy of roster building. You have your primary guys, the 1, you have 3 off the ball wing type players, and then you have a big man in the middle. Asar to me just fits fully into that 3. He's whether he's your shooting guard, your small forward, your power forward in, what we all used to call the lineups and the rotations, it doesn't matter to me. He's one of those three guys. And I think because of his versatility defensively, that's where he can be really valuable, is he could be any one of those three. I just think in general, the ball handling has to get better no matter which one of those positions he's playing. I guess a little bit depends on who else you have with him. But yes, obviously, the better he handles the ball, the more valuable he's going to be. I guess if you made me really say it, I look at him as more of a like wing forward than like a backcourt, off the ball player next to Cade.
I'm in the same boat. If he's playing the two, like he's got to be one of the better ball handlers, I think. For his size at 6'6", I think he would have to truly be able to not only get downhill, at his own pace, but find corner shooters, like all that stuff. Like he's more or less a full-time playmaker at that point, which to me, I still see him as like we're that 3-4 hybrid. I think his handle can get better. I don't know if it's going to get better to the point where he's breaking down defenders who are like 6'3", 6'4", and are just getting pretty low on them. But I like him as the 4. I just think defensively, I think that suits his game better. I think he's the type of vertical athlete where he's able to play a lot bigger than his size. Obviously, the rebounding, that like to be like ball handling, shooting, whatever. Like he's probably going to be more of a natural 3 when it's all said and done. So for that shooting guard to happen, like for me, that's not ball handling. Like that's part of it, but you got to become a really, really good shooter as well. Which of course we have to see to what extent he can actually iron that out. Oop, your mic is out, Bryce.
My bad.
Okay,
Last year, the 140 episodes, still making mistakes. Last year, the Stones getting run together in the D and the Rico Hines and such got a lot of press. What have they been doing this summer? Yeah, I don't follow this stuff in general. I don't know if you've seen anything, Omari, in terms of them playing together in any of these kind of off-season leagues or anything like that.
Yeah, I've been a little tapped out on the social media aspect, just being off, these last 2 weeks and most of this week. But, like they're doing the same stuff they always do. Like they've been, in and out of Detroit, like at the PPC, getting some work in. As far as Rico Hines and stuff, like I'm not really sure, like the extent that they've done that. Again, I haven't really been checking online as much for that. But yeah, like again, like every offseason, I think it's going to be pretty similar where you have guys in and out, working on individual things, getting some runs in together. As we get closer to camp in a few weeks, you're going to see more of an uptick as far of that. The Rico Hines stuff got so much press last year. Like I was a little surprised that, the fan base kind of gravitated toward that to the extent that they did. Although they did have a lot of guys out there, so I guess it makes sense in that regard. But Rico and Hines are not, like they're still doing a lot of the same stuff as last year. It just probably isn't going viral like it was.
Wes brings up a good point with the SAR. It takes advantage away from him too. The threshold for average quote unquote ball handler as a forward is lower than a guard or a wing. So,
yes,
if you're playing him as the 2, that like, as you mentioned, that ball handling has to be at an even higher level. We'll get through these a little bit quicker. Matthew Crow, what do you think the best way an NBA team can utilize their G League affiliate, and what do you think the new administration will do with the Crews? Yeah, this will be interesting. We've talked about this with Holland, with Klintman. We haven't seen, their lottery picks ever go down to the G League. Is Holland the first one that does under a new regime? Klintman as a second round pick, obviously there's more of a chance that he does. I think what I would like is you either do one of two things. And I guess this is kind of obvious, but either you see them just thrive in their role. And I think with a role player, that's what you want to see. So for like Klintman, go down there and just bang a bunch of threes. I don't need to see Bobby Klintman playing as the primary ball handler with the Motor City Crews, because I don't think that's ever his role with the Pistons. So like this is where having a real point guard like Jenkins makes your Crews team better, because he can operate the offense and Klintman can hit corner threes, transition threes, pick and pop, ghost and pop. And I want to see that from him, along with the playmaking defense, low man, all of those things. I think the other one would be for a Ron Holland. If Ron Holland did go down there, I would want to see Ron Holland be the dude and see if he could do it efficiently. Maybe it doesn't mean anything, but I don't need Ron Holland going down there and just being a role player, because I think you draft Ron Holland to be a second or third option on your team, like a primary option type of guy that's a real bucket getter. So if he's going to go play in the G League, it's because he's going to go down there and practice doing that. Now, the counter to me is we just saw him doing that with the G League Ignite. in an awful context, though. So I think those would be the ways I would want to see it. I think for role players, go down there and thrive in your role and show you can do what you're going to be asked to do with the big team. If you're doing it with a bigger name type of player, then maybe you see them go down there and do it on efficiency.
No doubt. I think as far as what they do with the crews, to do administration, again, is TBD. But like Bryce mentioned, we didn't see the lottery guys or really the first round picks at all really go down to the G League under the previous regime. But we've seen other teams get a little bit more out of their G League teams, and the Pistons have, I believe. Like the Rockets, they've been a lot more, aggressive in getting their young guys down there. Like Amin Thompson even spent some time down there last year as a fourth pick. We've seen lottery picks like Jarris Walker, Taylor Hendricks in recent years spend time with their G League affiliates. Jalen Johnson spent a lot of time with the Hawks G League team, and that worked out really well for him. So, like, I think we're seeing that, lottery picks can develop, within that circumstance, right? Ron Holland obviously came from the G League Ignite. You put him back down there, with some older teammates. You can see how he looks, a little bit more support, a little bit more shooting around him. Again, I can't predict what they're going to do with the crews. I think it's too early to say at this point. But you look around the league, I think teams have been a lot more aggressive in utilizing that team that the Pistons have. And some of that, too, is just because those teams are better and they've had roster crunches that the Pistons haven't had. But looking at the roster this season, I think you could see a scenario where Ron Holland's best chance at playing could be with the crews, or whether it's Bobby Klitman or whoever. So, yeah, long story short, other teams have been a lot more aggressive than the Pistons have, and they may have a roster that supports them doing that this season. But again, I think we have to wait and see, exactly what JB and Trajan Langdon are thinking as far as that.
Yeah, I mean, for reference, Sasser didn't play in the G League, and I don't believe the couple later first round picks, Sadiq Bey or Isaiah Stewart did either. So it will be interesting. Hey, Pod, what do you think about the Pistons scrimmages? Would you prefer more winnable games to build confidence for our young squad? So I assume maybe we're talking the exhibition games and stuff like that.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think what is going underrated here and under discussed, at least by us, is there are a lot of moving parts here. So I think just getting a chance to mesh together, figure out the lineups and the rotations with all these new players that have come into the fold, along with the new coaching staff and all of that. So yeah, you don't want to, I don't know. There's no easy game necessarily in exhibition or scrimmages or whatever, but I think you want to find a way and opportunities to kind of figure out some chemistry with this roster.
No doubt, no doubt. And I think we have one more because I know you got to go soon, Bryce.
Yep.
Do you think Cade will settle into his true profile like in college with Jay and Tobias being bigger contributors? I think true profile, I think to an extent, do we know like exactly what Cade is, right? Like he's like that primary guy and you just want to support him with an auxiliary cast, because if that's who he is, then I think Tobias is going to fit him extremely well. Just being somebody who was playing off James Harden and Tyrese Maxey and like we know what he can do. He's a consistent bucket. Like that's the hope. I think the hope is just to make Cade's life as easy as possible. That's what they talked about over the offseason, getting more shooting, more playmaking around him. And I think we'll see. But I would say Cade, you carve off those first 15 games last season, and his numbers support him being that type of guy. So from day one, full offseason under his belt, I guess quote unquote true profile. You have to see that, I think pretty early on, and that those other guys can thrive off of him as well because of his playmaking.
Yeah, I mean, like I thought coming in, Cade was going to be a little bit more of a distributor. I knew he would play with the ball in his hands a lot. Yeah. I thought he wanted to get his teammates involved a lot more throughout the game and then kind of hit the big buckets down the stretch of the game. We haven't seen that as much, but as Wes kind of mentions here, I don't know that we've had the lineups to truly put him in that scenario where it wasn't like, hey, you just got to go score, because nobody else is really capable of doing that. So last one here, Omari. We're going to go off Pistons here, and then we'll get out on this. Omari, do you happen to know the date today? I know you never know the day of the week. Do you happen to know the date?
It is September 9th.
I saw you check your computer there.
I did. Yeah, I did check the top quarter. I didn't know at first. I had no clue. I was like, it's September. It's somewhere between the 10th and the 5th. I knew that.
So is it appropriate that my wife yesterday on Sunday, September 8th, spent all day decorating our house for Halloween on September 8th?
How much of the decoration involved the yard?
So it actually came into play because he had these things she wanted to stick into the grass, and I was like, Wes says no, hard no from Wes. I appreciate that. I like played along because I'm a good husband and supportive, but I was like, you're really going to put those things in my grass after all of the effort I put into this?
Yeah.
But it's mostly on the porch where she's carved these pumpkins and they lied. Like we had a floating ghost with lights and pumpkins turned on last night on Sunday, September 8th. That was Halloween.
See, so here's the thing, right? I like Halloween. I'm not like a Halloween like super fan or anything, but I like the holiday. I personally would not be a person who decorates like my house and yard
That's
and
what
all that.
Wes says 100% out on
Yeah.
Halloween decorations.
Just because I feel like I don't get a lot out of it personally to put that up, But it depends. Like, do you have kids in the neighborhood? Like, are they going to trick or treat? All that. Like, that's all stuff that I'm not dealing with.
Oh no,
in my
like
life.
so our really good friends across the street, they have two twin boys that are like 2 or 3, and they were like heads over heels for it last night. Like they were so excited. It was the coolest. Here's what it's become. Those twins love me more than Ranny. But now Ranny's trying to get in their good graces with all of this stuff. So I think it's just a competition for the.
If they find out you're a Halloween hater, that might tip the scales.
I am absolutely a Halloween hater. I hate Halloween so much.
Why do you hate Halloween?
Like, what's the point of being scared? Why do I want to be scared? I don't understand Halloween. I don't understand scary movies. I don't understand roller coasters. I don't want to be scared.
How do you feel about the Charlie Brown Halloween special?
I've never watched it. I don't know what that is.
You've never watched the Charlie Brown Halloween special?
No.
Have you seen the Christmas one?
Maybe.
Wow. Okay, so I would say Charlie Brown Halloween is like one of the best, probably the best Charlie Brown one. But I would say like not necessarily the scary aspect, but just the like when I drive down the street and I see somebody with like the pumpkins and cobwebs and skeletons and all that outside, like I'm like, okay, like I like that, like I like walking past somebody's yard and there's just like this whimsical, like, all this stuff going on. Like I do like seeing it. Like I'm like the twins. Like I look out the window and see it and just be like I like that. That's a lot of effort. Would I do that personally? Probably not. But I do like seeing the decorations on other people's houses for sure.
So Halloween is big in my in-laws because one of my sister-in-laws got married on Halloween in Houston, Texas, and it was a Halloween themed wedding. Her and her husband were dressed up in costumes, and our family was the Wizard of Oz, right? Kansas, haha. I had to dress up as the lion. Like I had a costume and they hired somebody to come do makeup. The only time I've ever had makeup on my face. Like there was a picture out there, not publicly. Okay. I may trust you and Wes to send them to you privately.
I'm not gonna I wouldn't put it out there. That is
because if this ends up on Twitter, I may leave the podcast. Okay,
man, I gotta go
to school. I gotta go to school or else I'm gonna get fired and then I won't be able to I gotta pay the bills. So this was fun. We'll be back probably around this time next week. Hopefully we started your Monday morning and week off right. Talked enough Pistons for you guys. Go listen to Wes and Omari. Take it away, my guy.
All right. Thanks for joining us this morning. I'll no longer be off season in a week. So thanks for joining us this morning, and big thanks as always to our audio producer Robin Chan, our editor-in-chief Nicole Avery Nichols, and big shout out to Wes as always. And we will talk to you all next week.